It's been 20 years since the epic fantasy film The Lord of the Rings was released, and its visual effects still remain unmatched. Despite the high scores of the Hobbit trilogy, it couldn't surpass the trilogy's height. The novel took 12 years to write, and 4 years of repeated revisions and 4 years of screenwriting. The film was a 20-year accumulation, and is considered a Western epic. Earlier, I explained the Hobbit series, and today I will continue to explain the story that follows. To fully understand this magnificent masterpiece, one must first understand the origin of the One Ring. In the beginning of the film, the director clearly explains through narration that before the Dark Lord Sauron tore off his hypocritical mask, he, as a wise man, together with the elves, forged 19 One Rings for the benefit of Middle-earth. Among them, 3 were made by the elves themselves, 7 were given to the dwarven kings, and the remaining 9 rings were all given to 9 human kings. These rings were infused with powerful magic, and their bearers used them to protect their respective races. However, they did not know that Sauron, in the depths of the Mount Doom volcano, secretly forged a One Ring that could control all the other rings. Sauron poured all his cruel and insatiable ambition to control everything into this One Ring. The peaceful world of Middle-earth gradually became shrouded in Sauron's darkness. The Elven Queen was the first to realize Sauron's scheme, and they took off their rings. However, the 9 human kings were consumed by the power of the One Ring and ultimately became Sauron's puppets, turning into ringwraiths without physical bodies. To resist Sauron, the human and elven alliance launched a decisive battle against Mordor at the foot of Mount Doom. The orc army swarmed down the hills, and at Elrond's command, the Golden Armor army of elves launched a massive attack on the orcs with a hail of arrows. The vast armies were about to engage in a frontal battle, and the elven army immediately switched to melee mode and began to hack and slash at the orcs. Just as everyone was cheering for the imminent victory, Sauron joined the battle with the One Ring. The allied forces were powerless against the power of the One Ring, and the overwhelming attack suddenly shifted the tide in favor of the orcs. Even the human king was hit by Sauron's hammer and flew off onto the rocks. Killed on impact, the prince Isildur rushed to his father's side, but Sauron wanted to eliminate them all and leave no chance for escape. At a crucial moment, Prince Isildur picked up his father's broken sword and angrily chopped off Sauron's finger. The One Ring fell to the ground and Isildur noticed it. Sauron, now powerless without the One Ring's strength, emitted a bright white light and disappeared in a big explosion. The shockwave of the explosion knocked down everyone present. Eventually, the allied forces defeated the Mordor army. Isildur picked up the One Ring from the ground. To prevent any future risks, Elrond asked Isildur to take the One Ring to the volcano and destroy it. However, when the time came, Isildur was tempted by the One Ring and decided to keep it for himself. On his way home, he was attacked by orcs. In the chaos, Isildur put on the One Ring and instantly became invisible. He took the opportunity to jump into the river and escape the battlefield. In that moment, the One Ring had its own ideas. It chose to betray Isildur and leave him. Without the One Ring's power, Isildur's body was revealed and he was shot to death by arrows in the river. The One Ring sank to the bottom of the river and slept for 2,500 years. As time passed, this history evolved into a legend, until a chance encounter. 2 hobbits were fishing in the river when one of them jumped into the lake and accidentally found the One Ring. They didn't know the origin of the One Ring, but just a glance at it deeply tempted them. Smeagol, on his birthday, asked his companion to give him the ring as a gift.
Precious.
The two began to fight over the ring, and in the end, Smeagol strangled his own companion to death, and uttered a classic line to the ring. Smeagol used the One Ring's invisibility to return to his home in Shire and did many unsavory things. He was driven out of his home by his people and forced to flee to the caves of Misty Mountains, where he lived by eating raw fish. Due to being corrupted by the One Ring for a long time, Smeagol became a creature that was neither human nor ghost. Without any contact with the outside world, he developed a split personality disorder and often talked to himself while holding the One Ring. He lived quietly in Misty Mountains for 500 years, completely degenerating into a crawling monster. Time made him forget many things, including his own name. Soon after, the One Ring was called by Sauron and chose to leave Gollum. It wanted to return to its master and was found by the Hobbit Bilbo during his adventure. This seamlessly connects with the ending of The Hobbit. Hobbits mainly rely on farming and live on the outskirts of Middle-earth and Shire. They are naturally small, have large feet, and enjoy a peaceful life. They do not like to get involved in the affairs of the world. Hobbits cannot compare with dwarves in craftsmanship or with elves in nobility, and they are even far from humans. However, they do not demand much from life. As long as they can have a simple meal and sit on the sofa to enjoy the sunshine in the afternoon, they are satisfied. Because hobbits are so ordinary, Gandalf chose Bilbo as a member of the adventure team. Even though Gandalf knew that the One Ring was in Bilbo's possession on their way back, he did not expose Bilbo's well-meaning lie. The One Ring is better guarded by a hobbit than by any other race. Bilbo returned to Bag End in Shire and held onto the ring for 60 years. It was precisely because hobbits are so ordinary that they do not have any greed. And thus, Bilbo was not consumed by the ring's evil desires. The average lifespan of a hobbit is 100 years, but Bilbo lived to the age of 111, and his mental state remained intact. It is evident that the ring gave him the energy to live until today. Today is Bilbo's 111th birthday, and his old friend Gandalf has come from afar to attend his birthday party. However, he was stopped on his way by a group of children, as no child can resist his dazzling fireworks. In the evening, Bilbo invited everyone in the village to a feast, and fireworks lit up the sky. After 3 rounds of drinks, Bilbo stood on the stage to make a speech. Little did anyone know that Bilbo had been preparing for this day and planned to quietly put on the One Ring in front of everyone and disappear, starting his last journey in life.
I'm going now. I bid you all a very fond farewell.
This scene surprised everyone present, and Gandalf certainly knew that Bilbo had used the ring's invisibility function. He advised Bilbo not to use the ring lightly and asked him to leave it behind. The journey will still go on. When Bilbo was about to put down the One Ring, he hesitated and suddenly became very angry and irritable. He spoke the same words as Gollum did, revealing the ring's hold on him.
My precious.
Precious? It's been called that before, but not by you.
That business isn't of yours when I deal with my own things.
I think you've had that ring quite long enough.
You want it for yourself.
Bilbo Baggins! Do not take me for some conjurer of cheap tricks. I am not trying to rob you.
Gandalf used his soul cry to awaken the lost Bilbo, who sensed that there was something wrong with the ring. Once he regained his senses, Bilbo decided to let go of his obsession with the One Ring and entrusted everything to his nephew Frodo. Determined to leave the One Ring behind, Bilbo dropped it on the ground and set off with his luggage to spend his remaining years in Rivendell before the day grew late. Gandalf, who also dared not touch the ring's evil power, entrusted it to the protagonist Frodo, sealed it in an envelope, and left without saying a word. Gandalf needed to prove whether the ring was indeed the One Ring, so he went alone to the library in Minas Tirith and searched through a large amount of information. In the end, he found the record that described the creation of the One Ring. According to the record, the One Ring had an anti-counterfeiting function. It would display the text of Mordor when exposed to a temperature of 100 degrees. Gandalf rushed back to Bag End and threw the envelope into the fireplace. As he expected, it was indeed the genuine One Ring. Sauron's physical body had disappeared, but his spirit remained. If the ring was not destroyed, Sauron would still rise again. Meanwhile, Gollum was captured by the orcs, and Mordor interrogated him about the whereabouts of the One Ring. After undergoing severe torture, he finally revealed that the one who picked up the ring was a hobbit living in Shire. Sauron immediately dispatched the 9 ringwraiths to Shire to capture the person. The news quickly reached Gandalf, who urged Frodo to pack and leave Shire with the ring. He instructed Frodo to wait for him at a nearby inn while he went to seek the advice of the White Wizard Saruman in Isengard. All of this conversation was overheard by Sam, the gardener who was pruning the garden outside. To prevent the news from leaking out, Gandalf decided to let Sam accompany Frodo on this adventure. On this journey, Sam became Frodo's best assistant. Gandalf had come to request the assistance of his superior Saruman. However, at a critical moment, Saruman suddenly betrayed the revolution. Gandalf's face showed an expression of helplessness. Without any further words, the two immediately engaged in a fierce fight from a distance. When I was a child, I found this fight scene between Gandalf and Saruman to be very exciting and elegant. However, as I grew up and watched it again, I felt a sense of desolation and distress. Clearly, the grey-robed Gandalf was no match for the white-robed Saruman. When Saruman took Gandalf's staff from him, he had no means to fight back. Saruman used his magic to trap Gandalf at the top of the tower, leaving him with no escape. At that moment, Frodo sensed a looming sense of darkness and danger ahead. The four of them quickly ran to a nearby tree and hid beneath it. As expected, a ring wraith, dressed in a black robe, approached them. Sensing the presence of the One Ring, the four of them remained motionless and held their breath, afraid to make any sudden movements. Frodo, frightened by the encounter, thought about putting on the ring to disappear. Once the One Ring is used, the ring wraiths can sense its location. Fortunately, Sam stopped Frodo from putting on the ring. Pippin distracted a ring wraith by throwing a piece of bark, allowing the group to escape from daylight into darkness. However, the ring wraith continued to pursue them relentlessly. Finally, the group managed to reach a dock ahead of the ring wraiths and boarded a raft to escape danger. The ring wraiths, who were afraid of water, did not pursue them any further. That night, the sky was filled with flashes of lightning and thunder, accompanied by a fierce storm. Following Gandalf's plan, they made their way to the neighboring village and planned to meet him at an inn. Frodo asked the innkeeper about Gandalf's whereabouts, but he said he hadn't seen the old man with the grey beard for half a year. Gandalf failed to show up at the inn as planned, so the hobbits decided to wait for him while having a drink. However, a mysterious ranger dressed in black watched Frodo closely from a corner of the room.
Excuse me. That man in the corner, who is he?
Around here, he's known as Strider.
Frodo felt a sense of panic rising within him, and his subconscious urged him to put on the One Ring and disappear. However, at a critical moment, Pippin, who may have had a bit too much to drink, accidentally revealed Frodo's surname and identity. Frodo rushed over to Pippin to cover his mouth, but in his haste, he stumbled and accidentally dropped the ring, causing it to slip onto his finger and turn him invisible. Everyone present was shocked by what had just happened. At the same time, the 9 ring wraiths felt the call of the One Ring and immediately changed direction to head towards the inn. Frodo put on the ring and entered the void, where he saw Sauron's eye calling out to the ring, which undoubtedly allowed Sauron to know the ring's location in real time. Frodo, feeling frightened, took off the One Ring. However, he was immediately grabbed by a nearby ranger and pushed up against the wall. The ranger warned him not to use the ring again, as the situation was extremely dangerous and he shouldn't wait for Gandalf any longer. The ranger who grabbed Frodo was none other than our other main character, Aragorn. It was Aragorn's ancestor who had cut off Sauron's finger in the past. Aragorn is the 39th direct descendant of Isildur and the only rightful heir to the Kingdom of Gondor, as the last king of Gondor had no children. Currently, the Kingdom of Gondor is ruled by the Steward's family, with the regent holding the power. Aragorn has been living in hiding as a ranger, keeping his true identity and name hidden among the lower classes of Middle-earth. Everyone believed that the bloodline of the Gondor royal family had been completely severed. Aragorn, a close friend of the Grey Wizard Gandalf, was deliberately chosen by Gandalf to protect the 4 hobbits. The 9 ring wraiths soon arrived at the inn. Thanks to Aragorn's help, the 4 of them escaped a dangerous situation. Aragorn led them to the elves' territory with a plan to bring them to Rivendell to be handled by Elrond in the One Ring. That night, they decided to stop and rest at a watchtower, while Aragorn went to scout the surrounding area. The 3 hobbits started a fire to cook some food. Frodo quickly put out the fire when he realized it was attracting attention, but the light had already caught the attention of 5 ring wraiths. The group quickly drew their swords and prepared for battle as the ring wraiths closed in. With no way out, they summoned their courage and fought for their lives. Sam was the first to be knocked unconscious, followed by Pippin and Merry, who were pulled away. Frodo dropped his weapon and fell back in fear, tripping over his own feet and landing hard on the ground. As the ring wraiths closed in, Frodo put on the One Ring and instantly became invisible. He could see the true form of the ring wraiths, but even while invisible, they could sense him. One of the ring wraiths shoots an arrow at Frodo, hitting him at the critical moment, but just in time. Aragorn charged out with a torch and drove off the 5 ring wraiths. The Morgul blade of the ring wraiths was poisonous, and if not treated in time, Frodo would become a puppet of Sauron. Aragorn had no choice but to take him to Rivendell to seek the help of Elrond. Along the way, they encountered the daughter of Elrond, a princess of the elves. The elf princess had a dazzling holy light and a fitting background music when she appeared.
Frodo. Im Arwen Telin Letha.
Arwen is Aragorn's childhood girlfriend. Frodo is already too weak for the two to be intimate. Arwen decides to take it alone first. Frodo travels to Rivendell to have his father, Elrond, treat him, and still can't avoid Ringwraith's broken pursuit along the way. Arwen made multiple attempts to shake off the Ringwraiths in the forest, but no matter how fast her horse ran, they were always in pursuit. The chase went on through the night until they reached a river where the Ringwraiths finally stopped in their tracks. It seemed that the Ringwraiths were afraid of water and hesitant to cross the river.
If you want him, come and claim him. Nino Hithaiglir Lasto Bethar, Rimonin Luinen Lanin. Nino Hithaiglir Lasto Bethar.
The elf princess summoned a magical incantation and called forth a massive flood that drowned the 5 Ringwraiths. Frodo, saved by the princess's magic, lay in her arms while Arwen wept for his injuries. Meanwhile, Saruman communicated with Sauron through his crystal ball, and was tasked with building an army of Mordor orcs. They began to chop down trees in Fangorn forests, using them as fuel for their forges to create weapons and armor. To compensate for the orcs' inability to fight during the day, Saruman began experimenting with crossbreeding orcs and goblins. They managed to create a new, more powerful breed of orc, which was dug out of the mud and had to tear off a layer of mucus before emerging. These new orcs, known as Uruk-hai, were an upgrade from their orc predecessors. They were taller and stronger, and better equipped for the invasion of Middle-earth. Frodo was brought to Rivendell by the elf princess and was saved by the healing powers of Lord Elrond. However, his wound would never fully heal, and it was always at risk of reoccurring. When Frodo awoke, the first person he saw was Gandalf. He asked Gandalf why he hadn't met him at the inn, and Gandalf explained that he had run into trouble of his own. Saruman had captured him and imprisoned him at the top of Amon Hen. There, Saruman had tried to convince him to join his revolution, but before he could be swayed, the giant eagles from the Misty Mountains had swooped in and rescued him. In Rivendell, Frodo was reunited with his uncle, Bilbo. Without the influence of the One Ring, Bilbo had aged considerably, and Frodo could see the toll that the ring had taken on him. Bilbo was busy writing his adventures in The Hobbit, and Frodo was happy to see him again. As they talked, Frodo couldn't help but feel homesick when he saw Bilbo's map of the Shire. The One Ring has been successfully brought to Rivendell and its mission has been accomplished. What to do with the One Ring is no longer one's concern. Elrond summoned all the races to discuss what to do with the One Ring and how to defend against the coming invasion of the Mordor army, which is the fate of all the people of Middle-earth. Elrond asked Frodo to put the One Ring on the stone table. The first time we saw One Ring, everyone was mesmerized by his magical nature, except Frodo, who put down One Ring with a sigh of relief. Boromir, the eldest son of the recently taken Chancellor, was the first to step forward and try to take the One Ring, and Gandalf quickly stopped him with a Mordor spell soul cry. Boromir proposed to stay behind and hand over to Gondor to deal with Mordor's army. Aragorn interrupted Boromir's conversation and told him that no one but Sauron could handle the One Ring. Boromir was interrupted by a ranger and felt humiliated. Elf Prince Legolas stood up for Aragorn and told him that Aragorn was the sole heir of the royal family of Gondor and the rightful king, and that it was only logical that Boromir should be loyal to Aragorn. He disliked it back with a great deal of displeasure.
Gondor has no king. Gondor needs no king.
Elrond stated that the best thing to do was only to destroy the One Ring, and before he could finish his sentence, the acutely irate dwarves Gimli couldn't wait any longer, and picked up his axe and aimed it at the One Ring, chopping it so hard that the whole thing bounced back to the ground by the power of the One Ring. Obviously, weapons cannot destroy the One Ring. One Ring is the lava of the volcano of Doom casting, can only send it to the volcano of Doom to destroy it, and the location of the volcano of Doom happens to be is the lair of the Eye of the Mordor Sauron. Everyone is not willing to go. No one dare to risk going to die for nothing. In the midst of the council's debates over the fate of the One Ring, Frodo stepped forward and made a bold decision. He volunteered to take on the mission of destroying the ring himself. In fact, Gandalf was the last to see Frodo risk his life again, and Gandalf was the first to come forward to assist Frodo on this adventurous journey, followed by Aragorn, who volunteered to join the party, as well as the elven princes Legolas and dwarves Gimli, and, for the sake of Gondor's glory, Boromir, and, of course, Frodo's 3 brothers, the ones he was born with and the ones he died with. The 9 One Ring escorts were sort of formed, and before they left, Bilbo presented Frodo with 2 treasures, which were a spiked sword and a piece of dense silver armor. And as anyone who has watched Hobbit knows, the spiked sword exudes a reminder of the blue glow that is emanating when it encounters the orcs. The origin of this silver armor is a sad thing for Bilbo. When this silver armor was given to him by Thorin to witness his friendship with Bilbo, the silver armor is as light as a feather, invulnerable to knives and spears, and has saved Bilbo's life. But Thorin has left Bilbo forever, and he hopes that the silver armor will protect his nephew on the road to the ring. Frodo just unbuttoned. Bilbo saw One Ring extremely excited. He said he still want to take one last good look. After all, Bilbo has been holding the ring for 60 years. Frodo saw Bilbo's strange, and rushed to fasten the button. Inside the dimly lit dungeon, a large number of orcs swarmed. They attacked from all sides. The expedition team, which had just been set up, was besieged by orcs. The 9 of them couldn't hold back against the countless orcs, and the orcs emitted ear-piercing noises that sent chills down the spine. Heralding a greater danger approaching them, Boromir asks Gandalf what lies ahead, and Gandalf holds his breath, using his mind to sense the unknown risks ahead.
A Balrog, a demon of the ancient world. His foe is beyond any of you. Run!
Facing a powerful demon, they have to run away before it's too late, and even Gandalf isn't sure he can defeat Balrog, so they plan to head for Moria's pit to get rid of him. Boromir is the first to arrive at the pit, which is littered with broken bridges and arms, and nearly falls off a cliff, only to be saved by Legolas, who arrives just in time to hold him in his arms. Gandalf asked Aragorn to lead the crowd through the Big Joe Bridge to get rid of the Balrog, because their swords cannot play any role against the Balrog. The remnants of the bridge is very dangerous, not only no guardrail, but also everywhere there are broken parts of the bridge. The crowd carefully came to a steep broken bridge. Agile Legolas did not hesitate to be the first one to jump to the opposite side. The rest of the group hesitates as Balrog's red light is approaching. Legolas encourages them to jump over. Gandalf jumps over without hesitation and is caught safely by Legolas, but suddenly there are orcs behind them, shooting arrows at them. This certainly added to their difficulty factor. Legolas responded with an arrow straight to Orc's brow. Boromir rushed forward with a grunt as he held Merry and Pippin in his arms. At this point the bridge collapsed partly again and became wider. Legolas encouraged everyone while dealing with Orc's Aragorn to pick up Sam, throw him forcefully towards the opposite side. Stubborn Gimli says dwarves don't need someone to throw. Luckily Legolas grabbed his beard in time and pulled him back, and it was at this point that Gimli told the others not to grab his beard, at which point the bridge began to collapse partially again, and it was no longer possible to jump across at this distance now that Frodo and Aragorn are still alive. The closer Balrog gets to the stone bridge, the more it shakes. A boulder falls from above, cutting off their retreat, and the bridge begins to crack underneath, soon to be collapsing, with the 2 men standing on top of it, swaying and tilting back and forth. Aragorn told Frodo to tilt his body forward to wake up the incline, and sure enough, the stone bridge was tilted forward by gravity, and just happened to collide with the opposite stone bridge, and the 2 of them were able to escape successfully. Balrog's flames were already burning in front of his eyes. Gandalf told the crowd to cross the bridge first and stayed behind to deal with him. Balrog jumped up to reveal his true form, which was huge, and came towards the crowd with his bloody mouth wide open, and it was covered in flames that burned wherever it passed. Balrog belonged to the fallen Maya, which was on the same level as Gandalf, and he was a deserter in a great war thousands of years ago. He deserted a great war, hiding in the foothills of Moria for thousands of years until the dwarves were digging in the mountains and accidentally awakened Balrog. 2 dwarves kings died at the hands of Balrog. He gathered orcs and trolls, perennially entrenched in Moria, resulting in the loss of the dwarves' home, forcing the dwarves to the Lonely Mountain. For more on the plot, look at it in conjunction with the Hobbit I've narrated. Gandalf stood alone in the middle of the bridge, facing off against the Balrog. The Balrog rose, flames engulfing its entire body.
Flame of Udund! The dark fire!
Unyielding, the Balrog refused to retreat and launched a deadly strike at Gandalf. With Glamdring, the sword of the ancient kings, Gandalf shattered the Balrog's fiery blade. Unwilling to back down, the Balrog let out a roar and continued its relentless advance towards Gandalf.
You shall not pass!
Gandalf shatters the stone bridge with his fiat, and Balrog, with a great hissing sound, falls down the cliff together with the broken bridge. Gandalf was about to breathe a sigh of relief when Balrog's whip caught Gandalf's foot and kept pulling. Gandalf's life was hanging by a thread as he gripped the edge of the stone bridge. Frodo was so worried about Gandalf that he tried to run over to save him, but Boromir stopped him with one hand. With the bridge soon to collapse, Gandalf spoke to the expeditionary team.
Fly, you fools!
Gandalf fell, so deep that the abyss left us, and the expedition team that lost their captain couldn't accept the truth, and the sadness inside them couldn't be calmed for a long time. Gandalf's involvement in the abyss by Balrog has become a fact, and the crowd's sadness will not be calmed for a long time. But now is not the time to remember Gandalf, and Aragorn asks Legolas to wake everyone up to gather their spirits. If we don't hurry, the Orcs' legions will soon catch up with us. And Aragorn takes up the mantle of expedition leader, leading the group into the territory of the Golden Forest, where Gimli tells Frodo to be on his guard when he arrives. For a terrible elfin sorceress resides here, and a single look at her will result in the elfin sorceress's bewitchment. He stated that he would not be afraid of her, as dwarves had a keen sense of perception, and before he could finish his sentence, he was met with a bow and arrow to the head by an elven guard, and after some negotiation by Aragorn, they were taken to Karas Galadhon. The rulers of this land are the Queen of the Elves, Galadriel and her husband, and the elves come up with their own dazzling holy light and BGM. Galadriel is the most powerful elf in Middle-earth in terms of mana. Aragorn is Galadriel's grandson, and Galadriel is at least 3,000 years old in terms of age. Everyone who saw her was a little afraid to look at her directly as she could see everything with those eyes. Aragorn just looked up at Galadriel and she knew the expedition had lost Gandalf. Boromir locked eyes with her and suddenly for some reason started to cry. She was clearly talking to everyone and Frodo synchronized to hear Galadriel's other voice.
Shire. One who has seen me high.
While the crowd is resting, Boromir is having a really hard time sleeping, and tells Aragorn that when he and the Queen of the Elves locked eyes, Galadriel mentioned his father, and the imminent demise of the Kingdom of Gondor, but that there is still a glimmer of hope, and that he hopes that after he completes this adventurous quest, Aragorn will be able to return to the Kingdom of Gondor. But Aragorn didn't choose to answer, he just smiled a bit, while everyone is asleep. Galadriel walks slowly past Frodo, awakened. Frodo follows all the way, and the Elf Queen arrives at the spring, where Galadriel fills a bottle of water in a spring pool and pours it into a basin of water for Frodo to come closer to watch. This basin of water can see the future and the past. Frodo saw the brothers Legolas and Sam Pippin, and then his hometown of Sia, the beautiful scenery of Erden Cave, and then suddenly the scene shifted. The harmony of the home was burned by the orcs, who mercilessly preyed on their own compatriots, and those who survived were taken as slaves. The Eye of Sauron suddenly appeared in front of his eyes, and the one ring hanging on his chest was about to be sucked into the water, when Frodo used his great perseverance to grab the one ring back with one hand. Galadriel used her mind to start a conversation with Frodo, telling him that if he couldn't destroy this one ring this time, all the scenes she saw in the water basin would become true. She also told Frodo that someone in the expedition team tried to take the one ring, and that all the members would be devoured by it, and she asked Frodo to give him the one ring. Frodo does not hesitate to take off the one ring, and reaches out to give it to her. Confronted with the one ring, Galadriel stirs up the darkness in her heart,
In place of a Dark Lord, you would have a queen! Not dark, but beautiful and terrible as the dawn! Treacherous as the sea! Stronger than the foundations of the earth! All shall love me and despair!
Returning to her original form after saying these horrible words, she stated that she had passed the test and had also decided to stay away from the mundane world of Middle-earth. Frodo says he can't destroy one ring on his own, and Galadriel tells him that ring-bearers must learn to deal with loneliness, since she was also a one-ring bearer, and she was carrying the Water Ring, one of the 3 rings of the elves. She understood Frodo's difficulties. Saruman has bred a new species of strong orcs from the mud to make up for the orcs' inability to fight in the sunlight. And after swearing allegiance to Saruman, the strong orcs put on brand new armor and prepare to go out on the battlefield with the goal of capturing the 4 hobbits alive to take the One Ring. On the other hand, each member of the expedition team received a cloak from the elves, which was hand-stitched by elves and possessed an extremely strong hiding effect, as well as elven compressed cookies, which could fill an adult's stomach with just 1 bite. Legolas also received elven bows and arrows from Kellen and Trill. The Pippin brothers received elven daggers, Sam received elven rope, and Kellen asked Gimli what he wanted, and Gimli said that he didn't want anything, but only to be able to see one more glimpse of the Elven Queen's face, and that would make him happy. Eventually, Galadriel gifted 3 golden hairs to Gimli, and Frodo received the Star of Eärendil, which would bring him light on the dark road, and she decided to stay away from the mundane world of Middle-earth. A group of individuals is rowing a small boat downstream along a river. Legions of powerful orcs followed all the way up the shore. Legolas and Aragorn spotted the strong orcs tracking along the shore and ordered the group to move forward at a faster pace. They crossed the Doors of Durin, the northern border of Gondor, and these 2 huge statues were the ancestors of Aragorn, and it was evident that the kingdom of Gondor was very prosperous in the old days, and that Aragorn and Boromir, who were also subjects of Gondor, were overwhelmed by the sight of the glory of their ancestors. Passing through the Doors of Durin, the group prepared to go ashore to regroup and rest, and Aragorn suggested that instead of continuing along the river, the plan was to go through the woods, over the swamp, and straight to Modo. In the middle of the conversation, he realizes that Frodo and Boromir have disappeared. Boromir faces Frodo alone and loses his mind again, unable to resist the temptation to take advantage of the opportunity to snatch the One Ring, and he is very eager to get the power of the One Ring to guard the children of Gondor. Frodo can't beat him, so he has to put on the One Ring and run away invisibly. Boromir doesn't get his way, and falls, and comes back to his senses and feels guilty about what he just did.
Frodo. Please, Frodo. What have I done?
After taking the One Ring with him, Frodo entered the void. He once again saw the terrible Eye of Sauron, and felt that he was about to be devoured by Sauron. He was so scared that he hurriedly took off the One Ring and fell to the ground in the air. He was so scared that he took off the One Ring and fell to the ground. It just so happens that Aragorn finds him, and Frodo never trusts anyone again. Frodo told Aragorn to stay away from him because he knew very well that no one could withstand the temptation of the One Ring. Aragorn swore to protect Frodo's safety, but when he saw the One Ring in Frodo's hand, he couldn't help himself. And when he was about to reach out and touch it, Aragorn closed Frodo's hand and promised him that he'd follow him to the end, until the destruction of One Ring. Although Frodo temporarily puts his heart at ease, he still can't trust the members of the expedition team, and he decides that he wants to go on the mission of destroying One Ring alone, and he instructs Aragorn to take care of the 2 brothers, Sam and Pippin. Suddenly, Aragorn rose and drew his sword, and the spiked sword in Frodo's hand glowed blue, signaling that the orcs had arrived, and he told Frodo to make haste. while he himself stayed behind to break off the rear. Aragorn took up his sword and faced the legions of strong orcs alone, who hissed at him and provoked him, but Aragorn was undaunted. He fights and distracts the strong orcs, and Gimli and Legolas quickly come to Aragorn's aid.
Aragorn, go!
At this time, the strong orcs sent another way to look for Hobbit. Frodo hid under the tree was found by the two brothers Pippin. Pippin told him to hurry over to escape with them. At this time Frodo has made up his mind to complete the mission alone. For Frodo's safety, the two brothers rushed out to distract the strong orcs. But they were soon surrounded by the enemy. At a crucial moment, Boromir arrives just in time to rescue them. The sound of the horn signaled that Boromir was in immediate danger, and Legolas and Aragorn quickly ran in the direction of the horn, with Aragorn being intercepted by powerful orcs along the way, and the horn urging him to make quick work of the foes in front of him. Boromir called for backup as he fought, telling the two hobbits to run first while he stayed behind to break the back. Boromir was fighting alone and in crisis, when the leader of the strong orcs was slowly coming towards him, drawing his bow full of arrows and aiming them straight at Boromir's heart. He gave his life in order to rescue the two hobbits, and instead of falling weakly, he got up again with difficulty and continued his attack on the enemy. But the strong orc, not being a man of martial virtues, continued to make up another arrow to Boromir. The arrow strikes true, causing him to fall to his knees, witnessing the hobbit on the verge of being captured by the savage orcs. However, Boromir cannot bear to die without putting up a fight. For the glory of Gondor, he chooses to make a noble sacrifice. Summoning his last ounce of strength, he valiantly dispatches the two enemies standing before him. Until the third arrow strikes, he can no longer hold on. Falling to his knees, Pippin and Merry are seized by the orcs and taken away. Fortunately, Saruman's command to the orcs is to capture them alive. As he is unaware of which hobbit possesses the One Ring, Boromir could only watch as his companions were taken. He had done all he could, and the strong orcs were about to kill them all before they left. Just as they drew their bows and arrows to strike, Aragorn came flying in and tackled orcs to the ground, and in the area of strength the strong orc held the advantage. Aragorn is slammed hard into a tree, followed by a shield straight into Aragorn's neck. Fortunately, the groove in his shield proves to be his salvation, deflecting the lethal strike. However, the orcs show no mercy and relentlessly swing their weapons at Aragorn. Seeking to overpower him, he took the dagger out of his foot and plunged it into the strong orc's leg. The intense pain stirred the strong orc to fury. He drew the dagger from his foot and was about to strike at Aragorn, who sharply blocked the fatal blow. Getting up again with difficulty, he continued to wrestle at the strong orc, having mastered its weakness of slow movement. This time he speeds up his attack and cuts off the strong orc's arm, and in the process, he stabs him through the body. The strong orc is still trying to die with Aragorn, and Aragorn pulls out his saber and cuts off the strong orc's head straight away. The orcs had all withdrawn, and Aragorn ran hastily to Boromir, who, in his dying moments, confessed to Aragorn that he had failed to protect Hobbit. Aragorn comforts Boromir by saying that you have fought bravely, that you have upheld the honor and dignity of Gondor, and finally confesses everything to Aragorn, that he is willing to follow Aragorn as his vassal, and he recognizes Aragorn as the leader of Gondor, the king of Gondor. Aragorn sends Boromir off with tears in his eyes. The same scenario again. He didn't survive the first movie after all, and in the power trip, he's just as likely to not survive the first one either. Frodo looks at the One Ring in his hand and is deep in thought. He really wishes that the One Ring wasn't in his hands, but then he thinks of Gandalf's sacrifice for the expedition and is determined to destroy the One Ring. Frodo decides to embark on the expedition alone, and the simple and honest Sam follows in haste, promising Gandalf that he will do whatever it takes to follow Frodo and share the responsibility with him. Instead of stopping the boat, Frodo picked up speed. He didn't want to drag Sam into the adventure with him. Sam didn't care so much and headed straight for deeper water. Even if you can't swim, you don't want to give up.
Sam!
His body had completely sunk to the bottom of the lake. Along with the sunlight slowly and gradually dimming, Sam was about to be suffocated. A small handful of hope tightly pulling him up slowly, heralding Sam's new life again.
I made a promise, Mr. Frodo. A promise. Don't you leave him, Samwise Gamgee. I don't mean to.
This is not only the oath that Sam promised to Gandalf, but also reflects the friendship between Sam and Frodo, with Sam as the best assistant. I think it should be smoother in the next road. Boromir lay in the boat with his sword clenched in both hands. It was Aragorn who had arranged a simple funeral for him, and his body disappeared with the waterfall as it flowed straight down the rapid river, and Legolas motioned to the crowd to hasten to follow Frodo and Sam. Aragorn says that none of us can help Frodo and decides to give up on following the expedition to destroy One Ring. Gimli says the expedition team has been a total failure, and tells everyone to split their bags and leave quickly. Aragorn stated that the mission was not complete, and the three decided to catch up with Orc's group to rescue the other two hobbits. Frodo and Sam stood on a high mountain looking up in the direction of Mordor, and the risks ahead for the expedition without others to protect them must have been even more difficult to travel than before. On the road ahead,